Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. I'm Pinky Webb. Today on the program, the Armed Forces Chief deploys more naval assets in the West Philippine Sea after Chinese ships were seen there. But China denies allegations that their vessels in the Julian Felipe Reef are Chinese maritime militia. And lawmakers raise concerns over the motive behind China's vaccine donations as tensions rise in the disputed waters. Retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio joins us live. More naval units have been deployed to the West Philippine Sea as more than 100 Chinese boats refuse to leave Julian Felipe Reef in the West Philippine Sea. That's despite warnings and a diplomatic protest lodged against China. AFP Chief Cirilito Sobejana says 183 Chinese vessels were spotted inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. He also wrote a letter to China's defense attaché in the Philippines to discuss the latest incursion. Let's go straight to the source of the story. We have retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. Justice Carpio, good to have you again. Welcome to the source.
Good morning, Pinky. Thank you for guesting me again.
Okay, Justice, ang dami ko pong tanong dito, but I want to basically start with this background. I'd like to kind of put context first on what happened or what's happening in Julian Felipe Reef. So, the task force on the West Philippine Sea said that they received a report last March 20 of the presence of Chinese vessels in the Julian Felipe Reef last March 7. So, it had been 14 days before we were actually made aware of the presence of 220 Chinese vessels in our own EEZ.
Well, they've spotted those vessels March 7, but of course they were analyzing the situation, and they wouldn't, our military would not immediately disclose that to the public. But this is not the first time, because last year, February of 2020, they were there. The same vessels were there, parked on Julian Felipe Reef. Mm-hmm. And they stay there for months. So this is not really the first time that they've been there.
So this is the second time, almost exactly the same time last year. So
that's correct.
Justice, so I guess what I'm trying to understand is that it would be regular, normal, that it would take 2 weeks before we come out with this or realize that there were 220. Ang dami ho kasi, I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. And we're not talking about 10 or 20. We're talking about 220 Chinese vessels.
Well, the military spotted that on March 7, but of course, they have to get clearance from everywhere to disclose that to the public. But all of us who have been following these developments in this Spratlys know that these Chinese militia vessels have been going to Julian Felipe Reef ever since last year. Julian Felipe Reef is very near Mischief Reef. It's only 50 nautical miles away. Mischief Reef is the largest air and naval base of China in the Spratlys. So China sees Julian Felipe Reef as vital to the defense of Mischief Reef because it's very close. They don't want any other country to possess Julian Felipe Reef. It just so happens that Julian Felipe Reef is a submerged area. It's outside the territorial sea of any island there, and so it belongs to the Philippines. It's part of the EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone of the Philippines. So, well, China doesn't care, despite the professed love of President Duterte to Xi Jinping. President Xi Jinping has directed, of course, the Chinese to secure Julian Felipe Reef.
When discovered, Justice, a diplomatic protest was filed saying China should actually withdraw the vessels. Secretary Delfin Lorenzana also called out China and said to recall those vessels and stop this provocation. But last we heard, there are still 183 of those Chinese vessels. So basically, they're still there, in spite of the diplomatic protest, in spite of what Secretary Lorenzana said. What happens then to the protest or even to the call of our Defense Secretary?
So I'm happy that the DFA filed a diplomatic protest, but of course China will ignore that. We know that. So we have to calibrate our response. We have to escalate it a little bit. The next step is really to file a case in the before an UNCLOS arbitral tribunal. A higher step, a more serious response would be to send our Coast Guard vessels and Navy ships there. I would opt for the first step, just to file a case, because that will draw the attention of the international community to this encroachment by China, and this will rally again the international community against China.
Do you find some sort of possible comfort, maybe? AFP Chief of Staff Sobejana yesterday in the Commission on Appointment hearing said they will add additional naval patrols in the West Philippine Sea.
Yes, that's a very good sign. I hope he does that. I hope the president doesn't stop him from doing that, because we have a lot of patrol boats donated by Japan precisely to monitor all of these incursions by Chinese militia vessels. And we should deploy all of these Coast Guard vessels that were donated by Japan precisely for this purpose. And we should really use our naval assets to also monitor, because unless we are present there, China will consider that as theirs.
Yeah.
We have to show the flag there.
What happens, though, in the event that there will be more naval vessels patrolling the area? Are you seeing a possible standoff reminiscent of what happened in the past?
Well, I think everybody is aware that there is no point in starting a shooting war. And China knows that if it attacks a Philippine vessel, Coast Guard or Navy, that will trigger the operation of the Mutual Defense Treaty. And the U.S. has repeatedly said that the South China Sea is part of the area covered by the Mutual Defense Treaty. So China is very careful in firing on Philippine vessels, public vessels. So we have the back protected by the U.S. on that, and the Chinese are very careful. That's why China, we have this vessel, the BRP Sierra Madre Beach in Ayungin Shoal, very near that area. But China never attacks it, because China knows if they take out that BRP Sierra Madre, we can invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty.
So, to be very clear about it, we should patrol the area. Is it possible also to station a boat there, a Philippine vessel there, just like what we have in Ayungin?
That would be ideal if we can beach there landing ship, because that is ours. That's our EEZ. We have a right as the coastal state with the sovereign rights over that area. Part of our rights under UNCLOS is to put up artificial structures there. And a beached landing ship would be an artificial structure. China cannot put up artificial structures within our EEZ. Only the Philippines can do that. So we should be doing that if we are brave enough.
So not just patrol, we should actually anchor a Philippine vessel there.
Well, yes, that would be ideal, because that is how we saved Ayungin Shoal. Had we not beached a landing ship on Ayungin Shoal would have been taken over by China by now. Remember, at the time right after we beached BRP Sierra Madre on Angin Shoal, we also beached another landing ship on Scarborough Shoal. And that could have saved Scarborough Shoal. But when the Chinese president at the time visited the Philippines, he made it a condition that we withdraw our landing ship in Scarborough Shoal. And we withdrew it just to be honored by the visit of the Chinese president. And after we withdrew it, China took over. So we should be worried about the intention of China within the 9-line. If the president will authorize it, I would be happy. If he orders that we beach a landing ship on Julian Felipe Reef, because that landing ship is a public vessel and it cannot be attacked by China without triggering the Mutual Defense Treaty.
I got that.
China will not attack that vessel.
It's just like what we have, the Sierra Madre in Ayungin Shoal. Justice, I want to get to this,
That is
though.
correct.
The Chinese ambassador,
That is correct.
Yeah, the Chinese ambassador, Sir Wang Jilian, says they're not Chinese militia, but Chinese fishing vessels fishing in the area, and they've been doing this for years. First, is this true that they've been doing this for years?
Those are militia vessels. They are their fuel is subsidized by the Chinese government. They are trained. The crew of those fishing vessels are trained. They are paid. They have a salary, just like our militia force. And they're under the command of the Chinese Navy. So they are really part of the People's Liberation Army. They are in the part of the chain of command. And they are actually the third navy of the Chinese. You have the regular navy, you have the Coast Guard, and you have the maritime militia. And they have satellite radios. They can contact their headquarters in Hainan or in Woody Island anytime. They take instructions from the commander of the Chinese Navy in South China Sea. They are part of the Chinese military forces.
So,
and they do not do actual fishing. They just stay there in that area. They just park their vessels. They don't do any fishing.
Yeah, actually, that's why I asked that first question. Have they been fishing there for many years? Because that's just the beginning, because that's what the Chinese ambassadors said, that they've been fishing there for many years. And then the next question I wanted to ask you, how can we actually tell if they're fishing boats or Chinese militia? And what is the implication, indeed, if they are Chinese militia?
You can tell if the fishing boat is a Chinese militia because they are steel hulled. The hull is made of steel because they are made to ram the wooden ships of other countries. Second, they have satellite radios. And the China has this Beidou satellite system. So these vessels can communicate with their headquarters in Woody Island or Hainan at any time. Third, they are huge. They are not the ordinary fishing vessel. And they don't actually do fishing. They just loiter around. They are just consuming diesel, just loitering around. You can tell by the way they sail, because they're not fishing. They are actually just watching, monitoring. They are the eyes and ears of the Chinese Navy in the South China Sea.
Why do they need 220 of those?
Because they want to show massive force. They want to show to us that we cannot beat them. It's part of their intimidation. They have this 3 warfare strategy, and the third warfare is to intimidate the other countries into submission, to accept the 9-line as the national boundary of China in the South China Sea. And they do this by their huge air and naval bases in the Spratlys, by their huge fishing fleet, by their huge navy, and their huge maritime militia vessels.
Justice Carpio, lawmakers raised concerns over the motive and behind China's vaccine donations as tensions rise in the West Philippine Sea. Justice Antonio Carpio will be taking a very short break. We'll be right back. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. So I want to go back to this, Justice. Sabi po ni Chinese Ambassador to the Philippines, Julian, they are fishing vessels. They are there to fish. They took shelter, and they're not Chinese militias. So very clearly, sir, you do not believe this. To you, this is a complete falsehood.
Yes, that's a complete lie. Everybody knows that. Analysts who have been watching developments in the South China Sea know that.
So also, just wanted to add this, Justice, whether for the sake of argument, sir, they were fishing, they were taking shelter. If we look at those vessels again, if we can put them up on the screen, I guess my question is, would that be a normal formation of vessels fishing or taking shelter?
Well, first of all, Pinky, there is no storm right now in Julian Felipe Reef. Nowhere near Julian Felipe Reef is there a storm. Secondly, Mischief Reef is very near Julian Felipe Reef. And Mischief Reef is well protected, is very developed. There are ports there.
They can take shelter
if they want
there.
to seek shelter, they just go to Mischief Reef. And also, that kind of formation, you can see that in China itself, but you do not see that outside of China. They do not see that in other areas because you do that only if you are in your home port. You do not mass that way
Outside.
in other seas, in other maritime zones. You do that only when you are in your home base.
So the president said, we were told, of course, that the president, Duterte, plans to talk to the Chinese ambassador regarding this. While we are unsure of when this will actually happen, how urgent is it that the president speak to the Chinese ambassador, or are there any other diplomatic ways to act on this?
Well, as I said, if I were given the choice, I would already file a case in UNCLOS just to put China on the defensive. Right now, we are just talking, and for China, this just enters one ear and goes out of their other ear. And if we are really serious about this, the president should call the ambassador of China and berate him. And heads of state do this. If they are invaded, if there are encroachments on their territory or maritime zones. But here, he has scheduled a meeting with the Chinese ambassador. There's even no date, so there is no sense of urgency. In situations like this, you immediately summon the ambassador of the other country. Here, we don't do it. So the president is not concerned at all. He's not worried because he already said his protector is President Xi Jinping.
Even if, Justice, there have been statements made by the United States, Japan, I believe the UK, and even Australia on what is happening in Julian Felipe Reef. In spite of that, you don't believe, obviously, that the president is acting fast enough.
No, I don't see any sense of urgency, any concern by the president. Remember, he considers President Xi Jinping as his best friend. And President Xi Jinping has proudly told everybody he is the architect of China's expansion in the South China Sea. So how can President Duterte go against his idol? His idol is President Xi Jinping.
What do you see happening in the next weeks or the next month if this continues? If they don't leave Julian Felipe Reef?
Well, I think the president will just allow the DFA to protest, will allow our military to make noise, but he will not do anything because President Duterte doesn't want to incur the ire of President Xi Jinping because he loves President Xi Jinping.
We need to talk about the statement you made yesterday, Justice, on ANC. Yung sinabi niyo po that the vaccines, this could be a softening the blow because, I don't know, could it be a tit for tat of some sort, no? And we want to talk about Isang Bayan also. After the break, we will be right back. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. So in yesterday's interview, Justice, you said nga that, the vaccines that arrived yesterday, so here's the situation. We're telling China, leave Julian Felipe Reef, stop this incursion. And then yesterday was an arrival of the second batch of Sinovac vaccines. You said that, they could possibly, or you were suggesting that they could possibly be appeasing us by donating the vaccines. How do we go from here? What do we do? Should we still be accepting vaccines? Or in the near future, could these vaccines be held hostage at one point or another, sir, if things get more tense?
Well, it doesn't look very good for us, Pinky, because we are protesting. Our generals are saying we are being threatened by the Chinese, and here the president goes to the airport, welcomes the Chinese vaccine that's China is donating to us. I think it sends the wrong message, and it's not only vaccines that are donated. Most of the vaccines that our government is buying, the majority or maybe the greater bulk comes from China, Sinovac and Sinopharm. So we are made to depend on China for the vaccine at a time when China is encroaching on our territory and maritime zones. And how can we be exerting our utmost effort to defend our national territory and maritime zones when we are depending on China for the vaccines? Why do we have to source our vaccines from China?
Secretary Locsin, I believe in a tweet, said these are two unrelated issues. Are they?
In real politics, in international diplomacy, in international relations, they are related. You cannot separate the two. That's the hard fact, and you have to accept that. Otherwise, you are living in a fantasy world if you can separate these two.
Let's talk about Isang Bayan very quickly, Justice. So you earlier also said, when asked about could Senator Manny Pacquiao be a prospective candidate, you said he lacked competence as evidenced, not your exact words, by his absences at the House and the Senate. To which the Senator replied na yung pagkakaalam po daw niya ay halos wala naman daw siyang pagliban sa trabaho sa Senado during the 18th Congress. Or to be specific, he said, 4 lang daw po yung kanyang nalalaman na pagliban. Meron daw siyang pagliban sa pagpasok when he was still congressman. So he asks, bakit naman ngayon ito ibinabato sa akin? Could you care to respond to that, sir?
Well, I made that statement because I was asked, why doesn't Isang Bayan consider Senator Pacquiao as one of our possible presidential candidates? And I said, well, we have qualification standards, and one of them is competence, the other is track record. And if you look at the competence and track record of Senator Pacquiao as congressman and as senator, he was a top-notcher in terms of absences in the Senate and also in the House. Now, don't get me wrong, because Senator Pacquiao can run for president anytime. I'm not stopping him. But what I'm saying, he cannot be our candidate in the Isang Bayan, because if you look at his track record, based on his track record, he will not meet our qualifications.
Okay. I
Senator
understood.
Pacquiao can run because the Constitution only says you must be a Filipino, you must be able to read and write, and you must at least be 40 years old. And he meets those
Criteria.
basic qualifications.
Right.
But we have higher standards in looking for a president.
Yeah. Just one very quick question, sir. Is there a timeline? When do you plan to come up with your candidate, Isambayan's candidate for president and vice president?
Maybe August of September, just before the filing of certificates of candidacy in October of this year.
Okay. Are you getting more support, calls? I'm asking, sir, I'm asking about politicians. Are there more politicians active and ex-politicians calling Isambayan now to join this coalition?
Well, there are many who want to join, and we have asked them to form chapters in provinces, cities, and municipalities, even in barangays, subdivisions, and that is what we're doing now. We are putting up chapters all over the country.
Retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, sir, always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Pinky.
Thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines.